Welcome to the Cove Podcast, your stop for PME on the go.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to the Cove Podcast. I'm Captain Todd Lempa, your regular host. On today's episode, we're going to talk to Combat Experimentation. It's off the back of an episode with Colonel Penley, who's the CEO of 1st Armoured Regiment, on Combat Experimentation. But we're getting, I've got a few people been begging for a senior soldier's perspective on it and how difficult or how rewarding experimentation is. My guest today is Warrant Officer Class 1, Chris Sharp. He's the current Regimental Sergeant Major of the 1st Armoured Regiment. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, sir. It's great to be here.
Perfect. So you've done a number of things, which is so you were the RSM of 10th Light Horse Regiment in Perth. It would have been absolutely awesome to live over there. Sensational.
Sensational. Yeah.
Then you moved and you got deployed on Op ASLAN in December 23, and then subsequently you picked up the RSM gig at 1 Armoured Regiment down in Adelaide. That transition from an ACR to then a Combat Experimentation sort of unit. I'm not going to launch straight into that. I'm going to come back to ASLAN because you've given me an awesome opportunity to talk to current operations and our contributions the world over. We've talked to Paladin. I've got guests lined up for Mazurka. Let's talk to ASLAN. You deployed in December 23. I suppose ASLAN is part of the United States mission in South Sudan, implementing its mandate through the protection of civilians, monitoring and investigating human rights violations and creating the conditions enabling the delivery of humanitarian assistance in South Sudan. Let's come back a step. What was your contribution or the Australia's contribution more broadly in South Sudan? There's no one else there. Why are we in South Sudan? And what is Operation ASLAN?
Yeah, so the Australian contingent over there is largely centred on the force headquarters or the enablers to the force headquarters. We do have a small military observer presence, but that's situated within the town of Juba, which is the capital city of South Sudan. So not by chance either, all the Australians occupy key appointments within the force headquarters, and you are selected based on your merit and performance within your role within the ADF. And then you get the opportunity to do that for real in a real complex situation in South Sudan.
Absolutely. So I've just finished the 39 Operational Support Battalion Force Prep, so you would have gone on that before you left, and then you sort of get some briefs, and I imagine you knew, or I would know nothing about South Sudan, right? So you get this brief about going and preparing for this mission to contribute. Where did you end up in South Sudan, and what was it sort of like being on Operation ASLAN?
So all the Australian contingent is based out of Juba, which is the capital city. But there are two bases, there was during our tenure. One is centred on the airport, and the other is about 30 minutes to the south of the city, called UN House. And so we were split across those two bases, providing our staff functions as well as command and command support function.
Stupid question. Are you armed or unarmed, or what's the situation like in South Sudan?
So one of the UN mandates or principles is to be unarmed, particularly if you are a military observer. Now, just by nature of the complex situation over there and Australia's contribution to that mission, we were able to receive approval from the host government and the UN to be able to carry weapons. And there's a whole heap of regulations with that, what you can and can't do and what you need to be dressed in and the like, because the focus is very much the UN supporting the country of South Sudan, not the Australian Army or the Royal Australian Navy supporting South Sudan. So there's a lot of complexities with that. But yes, we carried weapons at certain times in the mission, and other times we didn't. We could escalate and de-escalate based on the force protection.
So I imagine, had you ever been to South Sudan before you flew in?
Absolutely not, no.
Yeah, okay. So you fly in for the first time. What was it like flying into Juba for the first time and occupying your new digs, I suppose?
Yeah, so we flew into Juba on commercial flight from Dubai, and it's stinking hot, and the airport, you walk into the airport, there's no lighting, there's no air conditioning, the conveyor belt is running flat stick and making all sorts of noises. There's people everywhere. The room is not, as in the arrival terminal, is not much bigger than, this room here or your typical mess dining room, and everybody wants to help. So the locals are all trying to grab your bags. They want to help to get the bags off the conveyor belt onto the trolley. But then you've got the immigration control who's looking at your passport. They want to search your bags, but no one tells you what they're going to do. They just go ahead and do it. So as part of the contingent that's receiving the new contingent, you're able to give them some standoff between them, their shock of arrival, and what the local population wants to do.
Because I could imagine you like looking at your bag, looking at your other bag, someone else has taken that. You're looking at some guy who's just taken your passport, and you're like, what is happening? Like, there's a lot of stuff going on. Like, what's happening? Yeah, absolute chaos. Yeah.
And I mean, the UN mission has been operating in South Sudan for over a decade. So it's not new to them, but it's completely new to you. You're in this shock at the moment of new country, new environment, and you're used to structure, and you're used to airports and the process that you go through. There is none of that there. It's just you get in line. The language barrier is also there, although the South Sudanese speak very good English. However, they'll only speak English if they know they have to converse with someone who's not from South Sudan. So there are a lot of issues with that. And once you get out of the airport, you're now in the 40-degree, 100% humidity, and there's no road rules in South Sudan. So you hop in the car, you're not driving at this stage, and you just battle the traffic to either the airport UN base or the southern one at UN House, and that's an experience in itself. And you probably don't understand how close you are to being significantly injured on the road until you've got your UN driving permit and you start to deal with that traffic on your daily basis.
I know you did a little bit of forward drive. There's a week of force prep that's out at Braidwood, I think, doing forward drive recovery and stuff. That's described as an excellent period of training. Absolutely awesome. The guy who runs it is a legend amongst everyone who's been, I think.
Yeah, Vic.
Yeah. Obviously you're looking at that training, you're like, I'm set up pretty well. You were also a ASLAV crew commander, and then subsequently went on, spent years driving an ASLAV, basically. You look at Juba out of the airport for the first time and you're like, this is more than I thought it was going to be.
Yeah. The course at the back of the ACT or in New South Wales was fantastic. And you often think when you're driving through the streets of Juba, you don't need to be in four-wheel drive, obviously, and you do a lot of that work on the course. But when you leave the city streets, depending on the season and the weather, you are engaging four-wheel drive just to get out of your UN base and maybe down to the range, or to take a side street to get to another part of the town because that road is blocked from with demonstrations or a car accident or whatever it may be. And the defensive driving, so not doing skids and handbrake turns, but being consistently aware of your surroundings and constantly looking left, right, forward, because you come to a roundabout and it's, if you see a gap, you go. And to get to that point takes a bit of time, but once you're there, you become complacent, you'll get hit.
I think when we flew into Dili in the same sort of fashion, like uniform advanced party, flying into Dili for the first time, and I still remember we'd been driving for a while in Dili, and then we grabbed all the new soldiers that were coming over to do the mobile training team, and driving for the first time, they're pinned up to the windows because they're like, what is this? It is utter chaos between Dili airport and where we were going inside Dili. But also someone explained to me one time that if people grow up riding scooters, they don't understand how large a car is and what it can and can't do. So that's why they're so chaotic, and they just swing in front of you because they don't know that you can't actually move out of their way and stuff. Danger, right? I imagine the conditions were the same in Juba. Maybe was there still scooters, or what was the sort of general population on the roads?
Yeah, scooters and motorbikes, because that's the cheapest mode of transport that someone can own. And then it's vehicles providing ride share or public transport and tuk-tuks. So there's a combination of vehicles and platforms on the streets. And it's just, if the gap is there, they're going to go. Plenty of trucks too. Like
just
trucks.
to complicate things more, yeah.
And it's just, it's, you see a gap, you go. There's no traffic lights, plenty of horns. And at night time is significantly worse, but they have a curfew.
Yeah. Okay.
So the host nation prevents the UN from driving at night unless you've got permission to do so.
Yeah, no, fair. So this is the idea of this episode was not to me to sort of completely derail this to ASLAN, but I think a couple of lessons learnt first before we move on to being selected as an RSM of our 1st Armoured Regiment and subsequently taken up the job this year and getting through some serious combat experimentation. You've deployed on MTF3, Taji, a number of different operations. How was ASLAN? We're looking down the barrel of a 12-month deployment, which seems like a huge time in comparison to the swings we used to do in the Afghan and the Middle East and stuff. How was ASLAN different to Afghanistan and Taji and any other operation you've been on in the past?
One, we're not deploying into a conventional role. We are, from examples, my previous deployments have been conventional cavalry or combat advise and assist roles. This was, you're going into a headquarters position, but you're still in a conflict zone. But the UN do a very good job of creating this complacency where you can go to a coffee shop that's on the base. You work with civilians day in, day out. And it's not until you leave the base that you then realise, hey, I'm actually still in a conflict zone and I'm not, working a 9 to 5 job. So the difference is that mindset change happens every single day. You battle with that every day.
Other than ripping in and out and being like, I'm completely on now ish when you get back to the patrol base or one of the larger bases and stuff. But then otherwise you're completely on. It was daily occurrence to switch between the two.
Yep.
So. And then subsequently, I suppose your job, let's hone in on your job as well. Challenges of being the RSM of the contingent. Going into a job, maybe you weren't, I suppose you would have got a decent handover, but unsure about what was going to happen and sort of what were the challenges you faced in ASLAN, knowing that they were going to and fro between all of the soldiers and officers were going between conflict and then green beans or whatever the coffee shop was called, yeah.
Being in there, one of the first Australians for the new contingent, so the RSM is one of the first in, so you get to work with the previous contingent there and the previous commander, and you get a really good understanding of what your role is and what everyone else's role is. And then when your contingent comes in, maybe 2 to 3 months later, they start to flow through, you're able to provide them the briefs from day one all the way through to the end of their RSO and I package. Now, the Australian contingent has their own role over there, but from the Monday to the Friday of a normal working week, you are not working with the Australian contingent. You are doing your role within the UN, either force headquarters or an enabler with the logistics or the support team.
So you could be working for another nation Monday to Friday, basically, and then come back to your, yeah.
Yeah, and that may be uniform or UN civilian.
Yep.
So for those of us that were based in force headquarters, it was a typical NATO structure, similar to NATO structure with uniforms. But if you were in the support element or the enabling element towards the airport, your supervisors were civilians.
That's wild.
Yeah, and so I suppose one of the challenges was my role in the UN, in the force headquarters, was the training advisor for the force. So the force headquarters is the force is about 15,000 troops, and many of those are contingents and they operate under their own C2. But if you are a staff officer or a military observer, which Australia provides to UNMISS, you come under force headquarters, at least in the short term, or at least at the start. And so my job is I see them first. So every staff officer and military observer comes through me in their first week of the mission. So I was, over my 12 months, I met over 600 officers from 66 different countries. And pretty much all of them have English as their second language. So it's a complicated task, particularly when my job at the end of the package is to do diagnostic testing when you're doing military general knowledge and an English test. So you get quite a few frustrated individuals who, when you tell them you can't speak English.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it means they may not continue on the deployment.
Yeah, and it means more to some nations than others as well in terms of their contribution and stuff. I have no doubt. Yeah.
Yep.
So that's the RSO and I component, diagnostic. I imagine you hit him with the how do you think you went as the first question of any. And they're like, I don't even know what you're saying right now. So you move forward to like running the training throughout the contingent for the remainder of the time. How difficult is it for, you've got someone who's dedicated to another headquarters or got a boss on this side, mums and dads type setup, and then now you have to tell them to continue to either upskill or continue their training and stuff. Where did they do that training? Like when did they do that training, and how difficult was it to run that training package for the whole time?
Yeah, so the Australian contingent, I used to tell the contingent that the weekends belong to the Australian contingent. They don't belong to you. And that wasn't taken too well.
I can imagine, yeah.
And I mean, the training program was for everyone to see, and would typically be out to 2 weeks, maybe 3 weeks, depending on who was on leave and who wasn't. So we try to maximise the attendance for what the training that we were delivering. But typically, our Saturdays and Sundays were doing force protection. Either we would go to the range, and that's one of the restrictions or one of the caveats on Australia having weapons in certain parts of the deployment is that the UN mandates you must zero your weapon system every so many days or months, depending on what weapon system you have, in order to continue to carry. So we would take advantage of that for our own force protection and our own upskilling and maintenance of combat behaviours. And it's quite a difficult thing to do when it's a joint deployment. So a lot of our Army officers that come on the deployment have done all this before, and then depending on what trade they are in the Air Force or the Navy, they are not so familiar with some of the combat behaviours that we are in Army. So to deliver that on weekends after a massive Monday to Friday in their office job or their job on the airfield or their air traffic control job, to say, hey, this weekend you're not going to have much of a rest, particularly at the mid to back end of the deployment where people are just like, hey, I've been doing this for a while now. I probably don't need to come and do this. Well, the answer is you're wrong. You do need to do this. And that was a really valuable lesson that we were able to put into practice during a kinetic incident that had happened in the town of Juba, right next to the support base that some of the Australians were based at. There was 50 cal rounds coming off of technicals that were ripping through accommodation buildings, and thankfully they weren't in the buildings that the Australians were accommodated in, but the weapon systems like the Dushkas and the 50 cals are just outside the gate, and they are ripping through buildings, and it is a conflict zone. So, and as I said at the start, the UN makes it really easy for people to slip into this complacency that I'm not in a conflict zone. I am on a working holiday or I am in an office job, and that is not the case. And to have that event occur, albeit, a catastrophe for the people of South Sudan, for us, it was a timely reminder that we are not in Australia. We are in Africa. We're in South Sudan, a conflict zone.
Yeah, and I mean, in a weird way, it helps to reinforce the point that you were trying to make, which is that this is incredibly important. Did you see that when they did roll into weekend training after hearing that incident and seeing, I imagine some of them seeing these rounds rip through like dongers or demountables or whatever it may have been, and the noise would have been intense. They are genuinely, it would have been all immersive, right? And your heart starts to slow down, and so. When you got to the training for weekends post that and everyone knew about that sort of circumstance, was it easier or harder to get them to like sort of go through the training despite being exhausted, go through the training and really put in for the combat behaviours and combat shooting and stuff?
Like it was never difficult. And people, our team was excellent, and they were, always committed to doing it, whether they were exhausted or frustrated or not. And after that incident, I think for the one, particularly the team that was in close proximity, they were able to use that as an example, and it wouldn't be like overt to the rest of the contingent, but use that as validation. We're doing the right thing here. We're preparing, and at the back end of that deployment, they were able to have conversations with the people that they were doing a handover with. That, hey, it's necessary to upskill and maintain your force protection.
Yep, absolutely excellent. That an amazing story and talking about the challenges of it's 12 months. That's a long time, especially if you like you said, working every single day. It's insane. And people say, oh, you get 3 rockles and stuff. It's like that's lovely, but we're working for 12 months. Like I'm away from my home for 12 months. So away from your home is an awesome point because your RSM of 10th Light Horse, you get picked up for that trip December 23, come back December 24. But I always hate this. You post into a new location and someone's like, oh, welcome, like this is awesome. Where are you going next after this? It's like, I just got here. Like, can I do my current posting first? Anyway, you get over to ASLAN and you put in your preferences for RSM time, the next job, right? Sort of if you don't mind sharing the preferences, but your first preference, but also like what's it like? Were you selected while you're on ASLAN, and how did you find out that you're going to the 1st Armoured Regiment? And what was that journey like?
Yeah, so my first preference was 1st Armoured Regiment, and there was some rumours that there was going to be a role change. However, it wasn't clear. I was still committed, and that was my number one preference. I remember having a conversation with CMA whilst I was over there, so that was a difficult conversation in terms of the communication means that we're on to try and get it to work. There's big delays and the like. And when they read out my first preference and asked if that was still the case, I said yes. They then informed me that it's unlikely to occur because that unit is about to fold and will be no longer. And I remember telling the person on the phone that that's actually not the case. I know that the unit is remaining, that yes, there is a pending role change, but I know the position is available and it's still my first preference. And then when the command list came out around Anzac Day, it was confirmed that I'd been appointed as RSM 1st Armoured.
There's a little bit of uncertainty about whether it will change from an ACR to what it will change to. You talked about a role shift and stuff. As you get that selection and you're like stoked to go to 1 Armoured, it's your first preference. You want to go in and absolutely smash it. I imagine you got some serious congratulations about being appointed and stuff. Was there anyone sort of like talking about, because we have this weird want to like shut people down or like a bit of tall poppy stuff and stuff. Was anyone saying like, oh, it's not going to be an ACR anymore, Armoured Combat Regiment. So like, why would you bother going there? Or like, sort of, it's going to be, you're going to lose all your cars basically. Was there any of that, or was everyone quite like loving it because it's an amazing opportunity? Yeah. Yeah.
So my cohort were probably dancing around that a little bit, but everyone, or mainly everyone, was saying well done, it's going to be a fantastic opportunity. And the conversation of the role change wouldn't really come up. I suppose once I knew about it, that conversation would always start with me, because I felt like I had to justify my selection or my preference to my cohort or to other people that I had been with in Army throughout my career. because I felt like it was in the back of their mind, and it was almost an uncomfortable conversation for them to start. And I would be like, hey, but it's okay, because my job doesn't change. An RSM of a unit is not built around a platform or operating a certain platform. You're built around looking after the people that you have, advising the command teams that you have, and making sure that the unit in their directed capability and mission does exactly that, whether you are combat experimentation or an ACR.
Yeah. And I suppose there's still a bit of uncertainty. You're still on operations as well, like still like absolutely banging in overseas. I suppose what was that? So that talks to the cohort, everyone like genuinely, I suppose it's different or misunderstood is basically like, I don't really understand what it's going to be. So therefore it sounds foreign and stuff, but it's like, this is an awesome opportunity to get after some and be right on the main effort of the sort of our DSR basically. If we fast forward to like taking up, so you get back from ASLAN, I imagine, take some leave, I hope, at the end.
Lee was driving from Perth to Adelaide.
I thought so. So anyway, you've got 80 days in your book now, I imagine. So you get to one arm and you post in. I suppose, what is it like seeing a unit move from an ACR to a combat experiment unit, and what's it look like on the ground as you take over? Scott Crum, Warrant Officer Scott Crum, who was RSM of infantry, he came on, he was talking about how nervous he was taking up RSM time of 1 hour again, because the expectations lift and you still get nervous, right? What's it like going into one armoured now, back to Adelaide?
Yeah, so once, the same as Scott, nervous, but not really nervous into what the unit's going to look like. It's because you're going into a unit where there's already people there that have been there before you, like the CO had still been there. How do I feel now coming into an organisation that's got things in order? Am I going to be able to nest with that straight away, or is there going to be some time to try and catch up? The role change, we went from around about 450 people down to around 100 full time, and we have numerous corps within the unit. We have our support and our enabler squadron, which would typically be the same even if it was an ACR, just some less people. And then the manoeuvre squadrons are made up of combat corps, but not just armoured. So that was something that I would think about. Do I have to be across every single person's MAE? Do I need to know every person's career progression? Am I doing interviews with everyone to decide where they go from here? Because right now, many of them don't want to be here.
Yeah.
So in my mind, I thought I was going to be in conflict from day one. How do I even establish a regimental routine when at the moment people don't even know what their job is in the normal day? And then you get there and you are doing the best you can, and there are trucks lining up to take tanks and ASLAVs out of the unit, and they leave the compound and there's just tumbleweeds going through the vehicle hangars, and you know that there's not a vehicle coming to replace that. So you then have this issue of role clarity. And down to the soldier level, they're pacing around the compound, kicking rocks and getting frustrated with the littlest things. And they say to themselves, like, I didn't sign up for this. Even though they were given forewarning that there is a change occurring and this is what's going to happen, many people will just think, okay, yeah, I'll be able to deal with that when the time comes. When the time comes, it's a shock to the system. So that was a real challenge, and it went on for some time until we really found our feet in the combat experimentation role, and that was probably right up to that lead up to exercise Talisman Sabre.
Yeah, I want to come back to the secos. Like, I imagine they had, like, the soldiers have got questions for the secos, and they're like, I can't. Like, normally I would be able to answer these questions, right? Because it's quite normal. I have a routine and I understand, and I can't answer these questions. I come back to that, and I think we'll be able to do that in the field. But so you deploy on this first. It was a Black Prince. Was that the exercise? Yeah, Coltana.
Yes.
Yeah, sweet. So you roll out of the gates for the first time not without vehicles, but because obviously we had Colonel Penley on, not without vehicles, but like with far less vehicles than you had before. What was it like deploying into the field with those soldiers that were at the time unclear and couldn't quite get excited about what their new job was going to be because there was so much uncertainty? What was it like rolling into Black Prince for the first time at Coltana?
I think from my perspective and from talking to a number of the senior NCOs is they tried to keep it the same. They tried to have the same mentality around hitting the field, whether you were an infantry company or a cavalry squadron. And then when they hit the ground, it became quite clear that wasn't going to be the case. And so that was a difficult thing, particularly for the command teams of the subunits to deal with, as we've prepped our soldiers or prepped our teams for something that it kind of hasn't worked out to be. Yeah. And there is no, when it comes to combat experimentation, yes, there's milestones and outcomes that are directed, but it's so reliant on the equipment. Yes, and so is being in an ACR, but you know what to do. Like, you know how to operate that machine. You know what is the expected outcome of an ATL 5. And if it doesn't work, you're able to have, if it's mechanical or technical, you've got the expertise within the unit to fix that. If it's tactical, then, you know, you get a slap in the face and then sort it out next time. Those opportunities don't exist in combat experimentation. When the equipment fails, like it fails big time, and then so you're in the field for 2 weeks, but on day 2, you no longer have any equipment. So then the OCs are like, I can't just tell the boss that I'm coming back in to Camp Baxter. We've got to actually stay out in the field, which is true because we are a combat unit. So yes, we have platforms to experiment with, but our role is to make sure that piece of kit can actually provide an effect in a tactical task. So without the kit, you still need to be able to do the tactical task and provide that effect. And there are learning opportunities when you're in the field that you don't get when you're in barracks. So you have this play-off where you have the soldiers going, we literally have no more reason to be here. And the command teams are saying, yes, we do, because we're still combat focused. We've still got a job to do. In 5 months' time, we'll integrate with other combat brigades and do our task. And so it's like, when does the exercise end? Does it end when the equipment fails, or does it end when you've achieved all your outcomes? So that was something that they were having, a conflict or internal conflict with.
And I think it's important to note that, because the idea of you being in the hot seat is that we have trained, fully competent and qualified and like professional soldiers and officers testing equipment, because otherwise we would just keep throwing it at people in black polos. They can't test it like you do. So those baseline tasks of doing certain urban operations to then subsequently follow on test drones in urban or those sorts of tactical tasks, you have to keep doing that, because otherwise there's no reason for the unit to be there, because you have the tactical nous, the ability, and I imagine the workforce is slightly more mature than other regiments for that fact, because you're not teaching people, they're teaching the scientists how to use the equipment. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's something that I've been pushing this year is to the junior private of the regiment, to the combat team commander, you are a tactical advisor. So when you integrate with another unit in the 1st Australian Division or the 2nd Australian Division, you have a secondary role. One is to be that operator in the tactical task, but the second is to provide the tactical advice to the commander on how to implement that robotics or autonomous systems in the fight, in combat. So the private soldier needs to be able to have the courage and the confidence to go up to the combat team commander and say, sir, ma'am, I think we need to do it this way when we're implementing this piece of equipment. So it definitely, once we got our heads around that and the soldiers started to feel comfortable in doing that, and not only advising other soldiers and officers within the Army, but like you said before, talking to DSTG, the scientists from there, talking to the other stakeholders from Army headquarters, academia, and other units within Army that provide that supporting effect. They are talking to, everyone but the mate next to him who's in the pit next to him.
So we talked about black prints, your first exercise, and you try and brute force it to do exactly the same thing as you've done every year, and then you start to realise that it's significantly different to any other year because you're going into this stuff to achieve technical aims rather than a mission or an ATL you talked about before, Army training level. Like, you're not achieving an Army training level, you're achieving a technical task. And when that fails, you're dropping back to warfighting and honing the skill to be able to be relevant in that testing process. I think if we fast forward now, so a little bit of apprehension about going into the field, a little bit of why we're here, like I'm not quite sure, I can't answer all the questions. Let's fast forward all the way to TS25. You deploy on operations, or you get the signal to deploy on operations, and on exercise, and you're set to do a number of different tasks, but centered on combat experimentation. What was the sort of build up to TS like, and what did you achieve on the exercise?
So the build up was hectic, as most programs are across Army at the moment, but we had to make a transition from combat experimentation to combat integration, and that line was invisible, particularly at the start. And so we experiment with the equipment, but then when you integrate with another force who is using the equipment that you operate to enhance or augment the operation, it's no longer an experiment in that regard. But yes, the equipment is still under an experimentation framework.
I never thought about it. Like, so yeah, it's you're experimenting, it's safe and all that sort of stuff. Now we're going to integrate that tech in, and it's like, no, different. It changes the parameters or the ball. Goalposts. Yeah.
So there's no rinse and repeat. It's like, this is it. Like you are doing the combat task right now with that UAV or that UGV. So, and because of that, and because we had been focused on the same platforms all year, the soldiers knew the strengths and weaknesses of that piece of kit. And a lot of the time when we had experimented with it, it wasn't in the areas that we did Talisman Sabre in. So B Squadron deployed to Townsville and A Squadron deployed to Shoalwater Bay, and they were integrated into Battle Group Kapyong and Battle Group Warhorse. And the pressure or the perceived pressure on the soldier from 1st Armoured and the officers was, geez, we know how this kit goes, but is it going to actually perform on the day when the battle group commander wants us to employ this system? What if it doesn't work? And when they left Adelaide, they were extremely apprehensive on what they would look like in front of their peers on Talisman Sabre. And I didn't have to go through that, and I really felt for the soldiers, because it's not a good thing to feel. You almost feel foreign in your own organisation. You've been in the Army for however long, you're now being told to do something that no one's ever done before, and if it doesn't work, I'm going to look like I'm a failure. And we've had that failure discussion before, and the unit was able to reconcile with failure as part of experimentation and see that as a success. But in full view now of the rest of Army, it was on.
I suppose once I got through that nervousness and apprehension about deploying, and like gut wrench, I can imagine you can feel in your stomach type thing. It's like, I don't want to do this. This is insane. Because they're going to be looking at me, and if I have to stop the whole battle group assault, because I can't get this thing working, that's a huge. And you can tell them all you want, it's okay. Like, don't stress. They'll just move on and we'll get another opportunity or whatever it may be. But they're like, no, it's me, and they're my peers. I went through IETs with him. I've worked with her at the regiment before she posted up. Like, huge burden, and but they get into the exercise and they start to integrate. That's always a hard point, integration when you first infill into any sort of battle group that's not your own. How did they get after that, and how important was it to do that as early as you can?
So the integration piece happened not as quick as what we should have done it. Now, that no one's to blame, but it did expose how important early integration is, because the confidence required by the user and the commander is absolutely critical to being able to carry out the task. If you want to enhance or augment, or even at some stage replace the soldier on the battlefield in that tactical task, if you don't have confidence in the equipment or know what it does you're going to resort back to what you know. So I'm going to use a UGV to cross that crossing point. No, I'm not. I'm just going to put boots on the ground because that's what I know. But that's not the idea. We don't want to put boots on the ground. We want to put the machine out the front first. So integration was critical, and it needs to be done early. So that's something that we take on board for subsequent exercises in the future.
Yeah, so like infill early, be part of the planning, and genuinely have be able to brief that capability really well, like the strengths and the weaknesses and where it can and can't go and all that sort of stuff to get that value. So the commander's like, that sounds like an excellent option. Let's go nuts. Yeah.
Yep, absolutely.
Yep. So they start to roll in, and what tech were you testing on TS?
So B Squadron deployed with MRV, so the modular robotic vehicle, which is the remote controlled M113s. And we also had within A Squadron and B, UAS. So we had ISR drones as well as FPV attack drones. And as well, we also experimented or integrated a bit of C4I, radios and other communication equipment as well. The interesting point, which I alluded to before, so Black Prince is conducted at Coltana in the rolling plains of Coltana. And we still experienced difficulties and challenges there. But then to deploy...
Oh, because it's sparse, right? You're basically standing in the open for most of the time. That east is completely open to the sea, basically, yeah.
Yep. I mean, the only Op4 out there is a million flies.
Yeah.
So we hit Townsville and we're in thick canopy in the morning, thick fog. We hit Shoalwater Bay, we're in thick canopy, we're in an urban training facility, and the technology starts to, be restricted on how it can perform. So that then closes that gap between enemy, machine, and the forward line of own troops. So instead of having the greatest amount of standoff that you can achieve, that is now right up against each other. So the commander is then having to consider what robotics and autonomous systems can I use to still achieve that standoff, knowing that the terrain and the environment are having a say here.
Yeah, working against you. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I suppose that's all the things that you tested. And you get augmented with random things and stuff as well, but largely what you tested. Now let's talk so apprehension before deploying, nervousness in integration. I can imagine you're still nervous. And then the terrain and weather has a say. Let's talk about actual execution. Did they gain some confidence then and start to really get into this and start solving problems for battle groups that they couldn't otherwise solve themselves? Was that the standpoint you got to at the end of the exercise?
We did, to varying levels. However, I must commend the commanders of the battle groups that they were attached to, because they knew as well as we did that it's critical to not just push these bits of kit aside because they're not working as what it says on the box. You have to keep persevering because it's not going to be, perfect on the day, and nothing will be, because as you've discussed, terrain, weather, the enemy, they all get a say. So to continue to pursue and have the effort to keep going was what we needed. And it helped the two combat teams because they were able to then provide the advice back to the commander and say, we're not going to use this because the terrain's too restrictive, but we're going to go to this. And then as the exercise went on and they came to both culminating activities in both locations, both combat teams had decisive success with implementation of robotics and autonomous systems, which had, I suppose, the enemy and the party that was playing enemy second guessing themselves, I haven't been exposed to this before. Like the drones flying through windows, the FPV noise just constantly going over their heads, carriers and other vehicles that don't have humans in them driving through the street or occupying an SBF location. It creates a dilemma for the enemy to then decide, am I going to counter this with my own fighting element, who are humans, against the machine? So it puts it puts them into a dilemma. And I know both squadrons, A and B, were able to, get there in the end and actually provide a significant effect on the culminating activity.
Ladies and gents, driving or flying or operating these things, did anyone come back to you and be like, RSM, that was absolutely mint. Like, we just smashed that. And they're like telling you stories about how they threw the enemy party into some sort of like complete confusion, and like, were people coming back and being like, this is electric?
Yeah, they were. And the most, one of the most pleasing things about it and exciting for me was it wasn't just the soldier, the private or the trooper or the junior NCO that was doing it. I had the combat team commanders coming back and saying, this is an unreal concept. Like, we need to continue with this because it is decisive and critical for success in the future. And I know, particularly with FPV strike, that just created havoc. Once we got them up and we were able to have our remote pilots become familiar with the terrain they were flying them in, it was something that they were speaking and still speak about now as we look forward to doing live fire FPV at the back end of this year.
Or I could imagine, because the enemy's gone through this point of like, it's not so much that like I don't know, that there's not a person there. You're just trying to complicate the targeting cycle to be like, do I waste ordnance on that, knowing that I don't know what it's capable of? You're trying to just completely like bamboozle, basically. Yeah. That's absolutely awesome. I suppose that's TS in a nutshell. You go through that huge apprehension and like gut-wrenching feeling of being in front of people and being on the stage, that being from Dig all the way up to the combat team commanders. And I imagine you and the CO felt the same thing. Subsequently, you go through and you have some serious wins. Like, you get some serious traction, and then soldiers and, like you said before, combat team commanders are coming up to me like, this is electric, right? We're achieving this effect on the enemy and completely bamboozling them. So you post, so that's awesome. End X, so like, have I imagine beers in Townsville and then truck back to Adelaide. So you're getting back to that compound you talked about, tumbleweeds floating through at the start of the episode, and when you first got to the unit. What's it like? What's the environment like when you get back to 1st Armoured Regiment and you've just done TS?
So we get back to the compound and the equipment starts to come back from the 2 locations in Queensland, and the soldiers are straight onto it. It's a hive of activity and doing things that traditional units don't do when they do refit to fight. So we're not pulling through barrels and bashing track. We are reconfiguring radios, re-establishing C2 links, 3D printing, drone rotors, and some these things that are just seem so foreign, but not to the soldiers and officers anymore. Like, it has now become their routine. So, and they are getting the equipment ready to go for subsequent activities. And we have a whole heap of other activities that we're doing for the remainder of the year and into next year. And without the tech and the soldiers having that equipment husbandry mindset, we're not going to be able to achieve it.
So, and they're getting straight into it without prompting, getting all that back into the equipment to refit in a completely unconventional way. So at the start you talked about the soldiers being apprehensive about being there and being like, what are we even here for, and all that sort of stuff. What are we getting once you get back from Talisman Sabre 25?
So the postings...
Because they've already been posted now, right? Have they been posted? Yeah, July, first round postings come out. So they know where they're going.
They
right?
do, yeah. And so there's also a number of soldiers that have tenure for 1 more year. And regardless of whether they had a posting order or they knew they were remaining for 1 more year, it was an overwhelming, do not think about posting me. I am not leaving this unit. And it's a great thing for the unit, and just having the morale and everyone's so pumped to be there. Stark difference from the start of the year. But then it's a really complex conversation that I have to have.
Because you manage that, right? So, yeah.
That I need to tell them that you are posting.
Yeah.
Your role in the Australian Army is infantry, or your role is cavalry. You need to go back to one of those units, one of the regiments or the battalions, and you can take what you've learnt here back to that unit because you'll be the only one. So they're going to rely on you to provide the advice and implement RAS in their daily tasks. But this is iteration 1, so that's been a difficult thing to get through to the soldiers, and also reconcile with myself, because we've had such a year where we've gone from, not rock bottom, but uncertainty, no clarity, to now we have heaps more clarity, and that you want to embrace that, you want to hold on to it, because you don't want to go through the low points that you had this year, next year. But so, I'll give a plug to CMA. They've helped me out this year, and I'm extremely grateful for their assistance.
Yeah, burn all your capital. But I imagine the PE 166 is just like an insane amount of PE 166 processing through.
Yeah. And so the subunit command teams now are well versed and experienced on the PE 166 process.
Yeah,
and the subsequent conversations that have to occur.
Yeah, the tough ones. So we get to that point, back to the compound. We refit to fight. What are we refitting for? What's your next activity, or what's the big ticket items for 1st Armoured Regiment going forward?
So the back end of this year, we're doing FPV live fire, and so we'll do that in November, and then we'll also look to do it in 2026 in Q1. And we're also heavily involved in LAN 156 project with the user evaluation of that, where we'll transition into some live fire activities.
What's LAN 156, sorry?
It's the counter UAS project.
Yep.
So we will be heavily involved in that at the end of this year. Our main effort for 2026 is Project Convergence in the US, where the regiment will... So we did PCC 5 this year as a subunit. PCC 6 sees the 1st Armoured Regiment go as a whole.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, I did Project Convergence 22 as a small element, more on the ASLAN component, where you're in the headquarters supplementing the C4I component. And now we've sent a full squadron. Now we're sending a whole regiment. Absolutely awesome. Project Convergence Capstone 6 in 2026. It should be absolutely awesome. That's what's next for 1st Armoured Regiment. That's what the whole world of emotion has been throughout. And then to get to that exciting component where you're absolutely kicking goals, that would be awesome to be an RSM of that. Warrant Officer Chris Sharp, thank you so much. Regimental Sergeant Major of 1st Armoured Regiment, thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Thanks, Sarah. I really appreciate it. And this has been a great experience for me. So
awesome. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Cove Podcast. Explore our channel for more great audio PME content. Also, visit us at cove.army.gov.au for hundreds of additional resources. The Cove, the learning home of the Australian profession of arms.